Hey there, I'm Thea Dudley, also known as the Credit Overlord, and welcome to LBM Talks Credit. We are the only podcast that talks trade credit in the lumber and building material space. Never miss an episode, stay tuned, and we're glad you're here. Hey everybody, welcome to LBM Community Talks Credit. I'm Thea Dudley, Credit Overlord. I'm thrilled that you guys are back with us. Today, we are going to talk about tech. And so I'm really excited to have Ryan Ayers here with us, co-founder of Suppli. Yeah, I love the product. I want to talk more about the challenges behind tech because we have so many people that, tech's a big buzzword. Everybody loves it. Everybody says they want to use it, and then they don't. There's that fear-based, and somebody's got to drive it, and then, to get that project off the ground. And then we got to talk about the cost of it. And when it comes to cash flow, even though we all know we need it, people tend to get cheap. I'm just going to put that out there. They tend to cheapen up about it. So
Sure.
When you're talking to people and, some advice you would give for our credit community, how do you go about having that C-suite conversation about why tech is important and maybe questions to ask to qualify stuff?
Yeah, that's right. I think, you've got to understand kind of what the organization is looking to solve. And oftentimes what we find is there's different issues depending upon who's talking about the technology. So the credit team, for example, might be very focused on time savings, making their process more efficient, being able to free up their time from, menial or repetitive tasks to really do the higher value work in credit, right? The reality is, though, at the C-suite, they're not on the front lines every day on these creditor collection calls. They may not realize how antiquated the underlying process is. So a lot of the times what we find there is they're going to be focused on things that are more about driving kind of the top line or overall customer experience. So, taking it back to kind of credit software, the AR workflows and the collection tools, probably a lot more relevant to the folks in the credit department. But they're going to have to be able to go in and also convey, hey, this is about more than saving our team time. This is about delivering the modern customer experience our younger buyers are demanding, and really more about staying competitive with the big national brands, at this point, all of whom have invested billions of dollars literally in building their own customer-facing technology.
Well, and that's a good point. So one of the things that I get asked a lot, because I watch a lot of demos and I actually kind of geek out on those. So I'm always really interested in those, but the average credit person doesn't have that kind of time. So when they're interviewing software, whether it's yours or somebody else's, what are some tips and helpful things you can tell them where here's where you should be focusing, or here's questions you can ask to qualify it? Because, for credit people, we're really good at what we do, but now we're also being asked to get into that tech lane. And it's really uncomfortable for some of us. I mean, I've had to learn tech talk, and I'm not spectacular at it, but I'm better than I was. What advice would you give for somebody, hey, here are some questions what you should be asking, what you should be thinking?
Definitely. I mean, I think the technology that's going to deliver the most impact is going to be technology that's designed for the work that you actually do. So what I mean by that is, hey, is this an industry-specific piece of software? Is it really focused on, my credit workflows in the day-to-day that I'm living in? And does the company really even understand what my company does? And so, when we're talking to customers, one of our favorite things is when they really want to get in the weeds and the specifics of, hey, this is a workflow that is not optimal for me today. Tell me specifically how your product addresses it. Because a lot of times when you're talking about technology, there might be, fancy buzzwords or slick marketing slogans, but, taking it down to the weeds and really understanding how is this actually going to impact, my day to day. And if the software vendor can't speak to that or is unfamiliar with that day to day, that's a pretty big red flag that, hey, this may not actually be a purpose-built solution. And are you going to go through all the time of implementing it to end up trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, right?
No, that's a good point. I know for me, I always ask, can I drive it?
Mm-hmm, exactly.
And that freaks people out a little bit because they're like, what? And it's like, I want to go in there and see if I can break it. And then I want to use it how I think I'm going to be using it. So I need to I'm very hands-on. I'm a visual learner.
Mm-hmm.
And I think most people skew that way. I want to be able to get in there. One thing that helped me in evaluating any kind of tech was process mapping what I'm trying to apply it to.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what it was, and creating those swim lanes and seeing where my gaps were, and then going back to the provider and saying, can you do this? And if their answer was, stick with me, we can build it. It's like, Okay, but what I'm hearing is you want me to invest in you, but you can't deliver it yet. And I'm not ready to sign yet with something like that because I can't afford for this to fail to my company.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think it's all about, a risk reward assessment and how much risk, are you potentially willing to take on kind of leaning into somebody. But I think that's great advice and something we really appreciate. I know it's coming from kind of the opposite angle, but is when someone's evaluating a platform like Suppli and they know what their internal process looks like. So they know, hey, I might be the credit manager looking at this, but I know I'm going to have to get my CFO involved or ultimately my president owner involved. And so what that helps, what that can help you do with the vendor is really frame out that use case and frame out, hey, how are we going to have to pitch this? Because so many times we see it where the credit manager may say, hey, this is an amazing tool. It would save me so much time, but my owner's never going to go for this, right? And so the earlier in the sales process, you can kind of work with your salesperson to identify, hey, who else do we need to get involved here? And how can we start thinking about framing these pain points in a way that's going to resonate with them? That'll make the process a lot more seamless in terms of getting that internal buy-in.
Well, since you kind of broached that whole, and I want to dive into this because this is a huge pet peeve of mine, and it's a pet peeve of a lot of credit people that we get super excited about something, and then it's kind of like you're following the Hansel and Gretel trail with breadcrumbs. It's like, how much is all this goodness? Don't worry about it, Thea. Well, how much is this? Well, give me a ballpark. Tell me if kind of early on in the process what this looks like, because if I get super excited about it, and there are some products out there I love, but I know for my average customer, they can't afford it. Mm-hmm. And so I don't want to get excited about something and then not be able to deliver it. Or it's like, well, that's a pipe dream. I'm never going to be able to get it. How can credit people have that conversation with people like you, with tech people earlier on in the process so that it saves both of you a bunch of time?
Yeah. Look, I think a couple of different things come to mind. One, again, is just being super upfront about it and knowing that, hey, this is going to be a big sticking point for us as a company, right? Maybe we're tight on budget. Maybe in order to get this, I'm going to have to go ask for more budget. And so let the vendor you're working with know, like, this is something we need to iron out ASAP because I don't want to waste my time or your time if this is something that ultimately I know is not going to work for my organization. I think the second thing is being willing to provide the information that the vendor might need to give you the answer you want, right? In a lot of instances, and we run into this from time to time, the way our pricing works requires some data and some input from the customer to really be able to tailor that proposal, right? And that's often the case with business-to-business software. And so if you're willing to provide that information earlier as well, that can help the vendor, really dial in and sharpen their pencil on what the pricing is going to be instead of giving kind of that generic, range of answers or, not getting to the level of specificity you need to be able to go sell that internally.
Okay, so that's great. And I heard what you said. How do I, as a credit professional, as somebody within the company, and I'm talking to you about it. Mm-hmm. It's like, Ryan, really love the product, really, but before we go any further, I really want to know I'm not asking you for a concise figure, just give me your ballpark. And they start hedging. How can I have that conversation, since this is what you do for a living?
Sure.
I'm great at asking for money, and I'm great at telling people no. Mm-hmm. But if it's something I really want, how can I move this conversation to where we can get to whether I can make this happen or not?
Yeah, definitely. I think, again, framing it as how critical that is for this deal to consummate and happen, right, is you've got to have that information to be able to go talk with the rest of your team. And I think a lot of the time, at least what we see is, if it's the person who doesn't have the ultimate buying authority, they can almost be a little bit timid to ask some of these questions. And I think they feel like, hey, maybe this isn't my, it's not my lane or my decision, so it's not appropriate of me to be asking this. But the reality is you're taking that step and being a little bit more forthcoming earlier on in the process is great for everybody, because when you do go to sell that internally, of course, your CFO, your president, your owner is going to say, well, what's it going to cost me? And if you say, well, I don't know, you can imagine where that conversation is going to go, right?
No, I know how that conversation goes. You look inept.
Exactly. Versus if you're able to go in and say, hey, this is why we like this product. Here's the value we see. Here's the tangible, ROI analysis in terms of what it's going to do for the business. If you're able to go and sit down with that, it's obviously a much different discussion.
Okay.
It's also helpful for the vendor, right? Again, if they know that this is something they've got to get to you for this deal to move forward, you'll be surprised how quickly their tune can change on that.
Well, it's funny because credit people ask for money for a living. I mean, that's our stock in trade. So it always baffles me when they're like, well, I can't ask. They're not going to do it. It's like, you haven't even tried. You ask for money for a living and this is your line?
Right.
With something that's going to help you move forward. So that's a whole nother issue. But dealing sometimes with tech people, there's a whole different language you guys use that sometimes things get lost in translation. Like
Sure.
I think when I say, can you make the software do this? I'm like, hit the button, make it happen. And you're looking at me going, that's going to take 4 programmers 3 weeks. I'm like, yeah, do it. Don't sleep. I don't care. How come this is so hard? How can I have better, more concise, clear conversations about what my objective is as a credit person, that tech is not my first language?
Right. I think this again comes back to kind of describing in layman's terms what you're trying to get out of the platform, right? And I'll be honest, it's pretty rare you're going to find a software platform that addresses 100% of every single need exactly the way you'd want it.
None of you guys do.
Right?
I just want to let you know that I'm still waiting for you all to build the platform of my incredible credit dreams,
right?
Which also includes a chocolate dispensary.
And so there is an element of I think setting kind of realistic expectations, but again, bringing this back to more brass tacks and saying, hey, look, these are like really the 3 workflows or pain points I'm really experiencing today. Can we start the conversation around how your product specifically is going to address these points and do it better than the other, 3 or 4 options I may have in terms of vendors, right? And I think that kind of really narrows the conversation in, and it allows you to really evaluate, hey, where am I going to, it's always the 80-20 rule, right? But it's where's this platform going to solve the 80% of my hair on fire problems and figuring that out, very early on in the conversation.
So that's another point that comes up with credit people a lot and owners in our industry is tech has suddenly discovered us. And we're like we're like that carcass on the side of the road that everybody's kind of landing on going, this is an amazing feast. There's so much here. And we've been overlooked for a really long time. So now it's almost overwhelming for us.
Yeah.
That there's so many different things coming at us. And so cutting through the noise, you either find people go one of 2 ways. They either just shut it down completely and go, I can't hear about another AI anything. Or they get so geeked out in the weeds that they demo like 15 different things and they can't make a decision. So we're in the same boat.
Yep.
So when you look at this and you're talking to, owners or credit people or, and people like me, and you're trying to cut through that noise, do you still fall back on that, identify what it is you're trying to do, and then, I always tell people interview 3 companies
Sure.
if possible? As a tech person, someone who came from a lumberyard background, because I don't think that's, a lot of people don't know that about you. You really understand the industry.
Sure.
And how would you approach that? Knowing what that when we're not going to speak always the same language.
Yeah, definitely. Look, you're right. The construction tech space has been on fire of late, to put it lightly. I think a lot of people...
I hear that they're going to move on to attorneys pretty soon.
Oh, well, we'll see. Yeah, they're probably already working that way. But, look, it's no secret it's a massive industry. If you look at it from a technological lens, there's a tremendous amount of white space. I think the big thing, I would say is there's a reason why a lot of that white space exists. We always joke, if you're sitting in San Francisco or New York, it's very easy to look at a lumberyard or a general contractor's business, et cetera, what have you, and say, wow, like this would be so easy to solve. Why are these idiots not doing it, right? And I think what's lost in there is they've not actually walked a mile in the shoes of the people that are going to be using their product and who are operating these industries. And so one thing I would really push on is as you're, if you're trying to cut through the noise of saying like, I'm just getting inundated with these things, really look at it through the lens of, is this a company that understands the construction industry or the building materials industry? Do they have experience in the industry? Or is this kind of an outsider who's coming in and thinking, hey, I can build something better, and all these people will just be amazed by it and use it right away, right? I think having that background is super critical for coming into a space like this. And then I think you're right. It's knowing what you want to get out of the software so that you're really leading the discussion instead of being, sold a dream, right? And so if you're going to go out and spend the time, meeting with multiple vendors, which I don't disagree. I think that's a good idea to go out and do your homework, make sure you understand the landscape that's out there. But that's a real project, requires real resources, right? So I think it's doing your homework before kicking that off to know this is really what I have to get out of this to make it worth my while, and so that I know that I have enough ammunition to go sell this internally.
No, I think I don't know that I could add anything to that. That's really well said.
Yeah.
It is such a project. It's one of those things that I know when you look at it, it's on your to-do list, and it is such an investment, because even when I select you, even when I say, yep, you are the software of my dreams, we are moving forward, I know that there's going to be the whole integration. There's going to be training people. There's going to be putting up with the different, you've got your laggers, you've got your, 40% get on board right away. And then 30% are like, maybe they're looking to see where everybody else goes.
Right.
And then you've got that remaining percentage that's like, absolutely not. And I don't want to spend my time with the absolutely nots. I want to,
Sure.
I want to get those middle group so that I can have the majority of the company going that way.
Yep.
And then we invite those other people to go find their smile somewhere else because you're this company's speed bump.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's my take on it, but not everybody feels that way. So one of the things is driving that forward, and lost my train of thought there, so we're going to have to do some editing on that. We were doing so good till then. But knowing that that's that project that comes up, that somebody has to be the advocate and the driver, and it's got to have that buy-in from, the top down. I think your organization has to really be ready for that.
Yeah, that's 100% right. Buying the software is just the first step. Obviously, implementing it and actually.
That's the easy part. It's
correct.
like, hey, we bought something. Now the hard work starts.
Right. Then the real challenge is, using it. And oftentimes with these platforms, the more you use them and the more you leverage them, the more that value is created, right? So if you're buying a Porsche when all you need is a bicycle, right? Like it's a tough, it can be a little bit tough to kind of see that ROI materialize. And so, it's about identifying, internally, not only, hey, who's my champion to actually, sign off and buy this thing, but who's going to be my champion to really push us to make the changes internally that we need to leverage this new tool that we have. And sometimes that can require, change in operating procedures or, and they're not necessarily massive changes, right? But we're empathetic to the fact that there's people who've done the exact same process the exact same way for, 15, 20, 30 years before the tool's introduced.
But that's their stumbling point. You have to want to let go of something to be able to learn something.
Right.
And, at some point, the reality is if you can't make the adjustments, then we either have to adjust the role. And I've had this conversation with credit people where it's like, well, Betty's been with the company for 45 years and, we're just going to wait till she retires. And it's like, so we're really doing this. We're really holding an entire company back because Betty doesn't want to change or learn or grow, or we can't maneuver it. We can't build it around it. And I'm like, we're really going to build a process around this person.
Yeah, and I think that can be critical, is identifying those bottlenecks or potential blockers and figuring out how are we going to solve this, right?
You're so much kinder than I am with it. I'm like, look, here are your choices. You don't have to adapt, but we have to have this conversation. And I think people are really reluctant, especially when you start getting into, well, we can't get into HR territory, Thea. It's a woman of a certain age. And it's like, I get that, but we also have to have the honest conversation about this is what the company needs to grow. And I mean, I wish that there was tech. Maybe I could, do some GPT chat that it'll create the conversation for somebody. But it is a hard one. And I've seen that stop organizations from moving forward with stuff that could have really streamlined and really helped everything. And instead you've got that one roadblock, and she doesn't, and I keep saying he or she doesn't care if they're the roadblock. Mm-hmm. How do you as a tech guy address that? Because you come from a different world.
Yeah, no, it's a tough one. I think a lot of the times what we've seen be really successful is showing that person the value rather than telling them. And so, I'll give you examples with Suppli, obviously, where, we're providing not only an AR and credit workspace to the credit teams we work with, but also, a customer facing portal and payment experience to their end customers. And so, oftentimes what we've seen successful is a customer will log on and use the new portal or use, a payment link sent from Suppli, and they'll say, wow, this is amazing. I can't believe, how much time this saved me. Like, the feedback, comes in really strong. And so what we'll often do is not almost like I told you so, but it's showing that proof point, or making that proof point available to the full team to be able to say like, hey guys, like this isn't stuff we're just talking about. This is real feedback from our end customers around, how their lives are improving because of what we're doing here. And so I think a lot of the times people, I don't know a software company out there that doesn't sell a dream, right, around like, hey, this is what your life is going to look like with our platform. But I think being able to put some of those real proof points on the board is something that's really helpful in kind of getting some of those laggards over the hump.
So that brings up one more question, and then I'm going to wrap it up because I've taken up so much of your time, and I really appreciate it. And I know that our community does too, because we have a lot of credit professionals out there that are looking to grow and learn. And not only do you have to understand mechanics liens and collection techniques and read a credit app and all that, but now you got to kind of you've got to expand to be a tech guy too.
Yeah.
So the one other thing that always comes up is we've seen a lot of companies come into our space and then leave.
Sure.
And that's a real fear. That's a real fear from some of our LBM owners, is that we'll see somebody come in, they make a big splash for a few years, and then they're gone. And we're like, okay, now we have to pick up the pieces. So what, especially for younger tech companies coming into it, I don't want to paint everybody as, gosh, you have to be around for 100 years before anybody gives you the respect. But the other side of that is, how do I qualify that? What questions can I ask?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's, a number of different things you can look at. I think some of the things we kind of point people towards, are obviously what's kind of the funding or the ownership of the company, right? How long have they been around? Who are their backers? Are they well capitalized, right? Understanding what that looks like. I also think you can look at, who else is this company associated with or working with, right? Obviously, this is it's a big industry, but it can feel very small at times, right?
We all talk.
Yeah, look, I think it's always, it can be a little bit of a chicken and the egg. A lot of the times the innovative tech companies are going to be younger, newer businesses, right? So they're not going to have the century plus operating histories that a lot of, LBM dealers might. But I do think there are things you can definitely look at, understand, hey, how long has the company been around, obviously? How are they capitalized? Are they venture backed? Have they raised private equity funds? Are there real investors kind of behind the organization? And then I think the other thing is, referrals and who they've associated themselves with, right? And you can lean pretty heavily on industry groups, whether it's, an NACM, one of the kind of regional industry groups, even the folks at the LBM Journal, where it's like, hey, they're vetting the companies they work with, right? And so if this is a brand new tech company and they don't have any of those types of industry referrals or industry partners, maybe that's a little bit, of a red flag. And so, those are probably the main things I would look at. But, we got to give the tech companies a little bit of a break too. Like I said, that innovation and change is going to naturally come from, younger and newer companies. And I think it's important for the industry to continue to support these players that are coming into the space, because ultimately that's going to allow companies like Suppli to continue to grow, build additional features, and become even more impactful for the the dealers and suppliers we work with.
No, that's a really good point that I hadn't thought of before, where it's I'm looking at it one dimensionally from my side, where it's like, oh, you've been around 4 or 5 years. What's going to happen? And you're like, well, you guys aren't busted a move there on breaking out tech. Where did you think it was going to come from?
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, I don't, it's funny, like a stat that always kind of blows people's mind. Lowe's has over 2,000 software engineers on staff, right? And
okay. Hard to compete with that.
Right. And you've seen some of the big national brands, invest in their own technology groups as well. But if you're an independent, 6-location lumberyard in the Midwest, I can promise you do not want to get into the software building game.
Well, no, you see Beacon and SRS both built their own internal platforms, and they have the time, the money, and the resources to do it. But for somebody, as a maybe one or two locations, or you've got maybe you're a regional player, it is a lot harder. You don't have those resources, but that doesn't mean you can't have the same type of footprint and you can't compete. You're just going to have to rely on some outside sources. And
exactly.
that's scary for the entrepreneur, in us, where that OCD, letting go and trusting somebody else is tough.
Yeah.
And especially tough for LBMers. We're a DIY kind of group. And so it really, we're like, we're going to build it ourselves. And then we realize our string and tin can aren't getting it.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think, again, kind of thinking of these earlier vendors is, it is a little bit of a partnership, right? And, you're kind of taking a bet on their ability to serve and deliver and continue to grow. But that's really the best path forward here, again, versus, having to build your own engineering and software team in-house. So.
Well, I want to thank you for spending so much time with us, Ryan. I appreciate it. I know the LBM community does. I know, credit people don't normally get a lot of resources and stuff thrown at them beyond, just the usual stock and trade stuff. So we love that AI is finally hitting our space. So, Ryan, thank you again so much. So Ryan Ayers joined us, co-founder of Suppli. We really appreciate the information on AI tech and how to talk tech to whoever you're talking to as a provider.
Yeah, awesome. Glad to be here, Thea. Thanks so much.
Thank you.